Do you know who I am? I donated $400,000 to this building. I sit on the foundation board. I have the chairman's personal number. And I will have your badge pulled before your shift ends tonight.
But you're still not coming through this hallway.
I will end everything you have. Every reference, every record, every patient who has ever asked for you by name. I will make sure the only thing left of your career is the memory of today.
Are you finished?
Some people walk into a room and the room rearranges itself around them. Not because of anything they say. Not because of anything they do. Just because of who they are and what they carry and the particular way they take up space without taking anything from anyone else. Elena Vasquez was that kind of person. She was also 8 months pregnant, working a 12-hour ICU shift on a Tuesday, and about to be slapped in the face by a man who had never once in his life experienced a consequence. What he did not know, what nobody in that hospital knew except the man standing quietly in the hallway near the exit door, was who Elena Vasquez actually was. And what happens when you touch someone who is loved by the kind of person who operates entirely in silence. Subscribe right now if you are new here. Drop in the comments where you are watching from. Because this story is going to show you something about power that the powerful never see coming until it is far too late. Stay with me. The ICU at Mercy Ridge Medical Center never fully slept. Monitors beeped in overlapping rhythms. The air held that particular combination of antiseptic and quiet urgency that you either learn to work inside or learn to leave. The nurses who stayed on this floor long-term were a specific kind of person. The ones who could hold a family together in a hallway at 2 a.m. while simultaneously calculating a medication adjustment with the other part of their brain. Elena Vasquez had worked this floor for 7 years. She was 33. She was the nurse that other nurses called when a situation became something they had never seen before. She had the particular gift of being the calmest person in any room that was falling apart. Not because she felt nothing, but because she had trained herself to feel it later. After the patient was stable. After the family was breathing again. After the shift was over and she was sitting in her car in the parking garage letting the day land on her all at once. She was 8 months pregnant. Her lower back had been a slow, persistent argument since month 6. Her feet by hour 8 of every 12-hour shift had stopped sending polite messages and started sending demands. She had a specific move she did between rooms. One hand on the small of her back, one slow breath, then forward, that the younger nurses had started doing too without realizing they were copying her. Nobody on that floor knew much about Elena's life outside the hospital. She did not talk about where she grew up. She did not talk about family. When people asked about the baby's father, she smiled gently and said it's complicated in a way that closed the conversation without slamming it. Nobody knew. Nobody was supposed to. Nobody knew that the quiet nurse adjusting in 4-line in room 6 was the younger sister of a man named Cain Reyes. Not his legal name. His legal name was Marcus Reyes. Cain was what the people who knew him called him, a name he had earned not through violence but through the particular biblical quality of his patience. He could wait longer than anyone. He could see further. He could hold a plan for years without moving and then move once with the precision of someone who had already played the outcome 17 times in his head. He was 38 years old. He had no criminal record because he had never been caught doing anything criminal, which was a different thing entirely. He operated 3 legitimate businesses, a logistics company, a real estate holding firm, a private security consultancy, all of which were genuine, profitable, and meticulously clean. They were also the visible layer of something considerably larger and considerably less visible. Cain Reyes was the kind of man that other dangerous men were careful around. Not because he was loud, because he was quiet, because when Cain Reyes finally moved, it was always over. He had kept this world entirely away from Elena her entire adult life. Not because he was ashamed, because she had asked him to. Let me build something that's mine. She had told him when she was 19 and he was 24 and she had just gotten into nursing school on a full scholarship. Let me be a person. Not your person. Just a person. He had honored that. Every day. For 14 years. He had watched from a distance, always a distance. As she built her life shift by shift, patient by patient, year by year. As she grew into someone who held other people together with her bare hands and asked for nothing in return. He was proud of her in a way he had no language for. He was also, on the Tuesday in question, sitting in a rented SUV in the Mercy Ridge parking structure when his phone buzzed with a message from a man stationed near the hospital entrance. Someone just came through the main doors. You should probably be inside. Kane put the phone in his pocket. He took the elevator to the 4th floor. He found a position near the exit stairwell with a clear line of sight to the ICU entrance. He put his hands in his pockets. He watched. And here is the first question I want to ask you today. Have you ever watched someone you love get treated as though they are disposable? As though the life they built, carefully, honestly, with their own 2 hands, means nothing to the person standing in front of them? Drop a yes in the comments right now. Because what happens in the next few minutes of this story is going to activate something in you. And I need you to be ready for it. Garrett Weston came through the ICU doors at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. He was 47 years old. He had founded 2 technology companies that had made him, at last count, somewhere north of $800 million. He sat on the boards of 4 nonprofits whose galas he attended with his name on the sponsorship materials. He had a table permanently reserved at 3 restaurants in the city. He had never, in the adult memory of anyone who knew him, been told no without consequence. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Elena made in 2 months. Behind him, a young assistant named Patrick was pressing a folded cloth against Garrett's right palm. A shallow cut, the kind you got from a broken wine glass at a business lunch. The kind that required a bandage and an antibiotic wipe and approximately 4 minutes of a doctor's time. Garrett Weston did not do 4-minute solutions in public waiting rooms. He surveyed the ICU the way a man surveys a room he is deciding whether to purchase. His eyes moved from the nursing station to the patient rooms to the monitoring equipment to the staff in the same order a real estate investor scans a property. Identifying assets, calculating value, determining what could be moved. I need a doctor, he announced. His voice was calibrated to carry. Not a resident. Not an intern. A real physician. A young resident named Dr. James Cho came forward with his hands up in the universal gesture of someone trying to prevent an escalation. Sir, this is the intensive care unit. Your injury, I can see it from here, is absolutely something we can treat. But the appropriate location is urgent care on the 2nd floor. These patients. Garrett grabbed James by the front of his white coat and shoved him sideways into the nursing station counter. The entire floor stopped. Not paused. Stopped. Every monitor kept beeping. Every machine kept running. But every person on that floor went completely still in the way that people go still when something happens that resets the rules of the room. Garrett straightened his jacket. He started walking toward the patient rooms. Room 4 held a 71-year-old man named Harold Briggs who had come out of triple bypass surgery 9 hours ago. Room 5 held a 44-year-old woman named Teresa Kwan who was being managed through septic shock. Room 6, the room Elena had just stepped out of, held a 58-year-old man whose oxygen saturation she had been monitoring for the past 20 minutes with the focused attention of someone who understood that the number on that screen was the difference between his family getting a phone call tonight or not. Garrett Weston was heading toward those rooms looking for an empty bed. Elena stepped out of room 6. She did not move fast. She did not raise her voice. She positioned herself in the center of the hallway between Garrett and the patient rooms, and she stood there the way she stood everywhere. Completely still, completely present, like she had been planted. Garrett looked at her. The look lasted about 2 seconds. It was the look of a man cataloging a person and deciding, in those 2 seconds, that what he was looking at was an obstacle rather than a human being. Do you know who I am? His voice dropped into something that was not quite a threat but was the infrastructure of one. I donated $400,000 to the cardiac wing renovation last year. I am on the hospital foundation board. And in about 30 seconds I am going to call the chairman of the board of this hospital and have every person on this floor reassigned. Starting with you. Elena looked at him. That's your right, she said. She did not move. But you're not coming through this hallway. Something shifted in Garrett Weston's face. The practiced composure cracked the way expensive things crack. Suddenly, completely, with a sound you do not expect, he reached into his jacket. He produced a leather card wallet. He opened it toward James Cho, who had flattened himself against the wall. Name a number, Garrett said. Whatever it takes to move one of these patients to another floor. I don't care which one. I need this bed. I need it in the next 5 minutes. James's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Put that away, Elena said. Garrett turned toward her slowly. The card wallet still open. Money doesn't determine which patients are stable enough for transport. The man in room 4 had triple bypass surgery 9 hours ago. The woman in room 5 is in septic shock. Neither of them can be moved so that you can have a room for a hand laceration. That is not a judgment. That is physiology. You're a nurse, Garrett said. The way he said it, the specific weight he placed on that word, made 2 of the younger nurses at the station look at the floor. You don't make decisions on this floor. You follow them. I make exactly the decisions I am trained and licensed and legally obligated to make on this floor, Elena said. And right now my decision is that you are not coming through this hallway. What happened next happened in under 3 seconds. Garrett Weston stepped forward. His right hand came up, and he struck Elena Vasquez across the left side of her face with an open palm that connected with a sound that was entirely wrong for a hospital. Too loud. Too sharp. The particular sound of something crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed. Her head snapped sideways. The clipboard in her left hand hit the floor. She stumbled back, one shoulder catching the nursing station counter, and both her hands went immediately to her stomach. Both of them, wrapping around the curve of it, protecting it. Her eyes closed for a second. That second said everything. In the exit stairwell at the end of the hallway, a man in a dark jacket stood with his hands in his pockets. He had watched everything. The shove. The threats. The card wallet. The slap. The way Elena's hands went to her stomach. He had a small tattoo on the inside of his left wrist. A single compass point north pointing up. He did not move. He did not make a sound. He took out his phone. He typed 3 words. He sent them. Then he walked out the side door. And what those 3 words set in motion over the next 72 hours is the reason Garrett Weston will spend the next decade in a federal penitentiary. Stay with us. The floor was silent for 4 full seconds after the slap. Not quiet. Silent. The difference between those 2 things is significant, and everyone on that floor understood it. Priya, a second-year nurse, stood at the station with both hands pressed to her mouth. James Cho had not moved from the wall. The security guard near the elevator had his hand on his radio. His hand stayed there. Nobody moved. Nobody said a single word. Garrett straightened his jacket cuffs. Maybe now, he said, we can have a productive conversation. Dr. Raymond Park came through the doors 90 seconds later. He was the chief of medicine. 61 years old. Silver-haired. The kind of doctor whose reputation had been built over 3 decades of good decisions in high-pressure situations. He walked in, read the room in under 5 seconds, and made his choice. He chose wrong. He walked toward Garrett Weston with his hand extended. Mr. Weston, I apologize for any confusion. Let's get you taken care of immediately. Elena stared at him. He did not look at her. Not once. His eyes moved from Garrett to the patient rooms to the nursing station to the floor. They did not stop on the woman with the red mark spreading across her face. Not for 1 second. Garrett rolled his shoulders back. Your nurse was obstructive and unprofessional. I want her removed from this floor. Park nodded. Slowly. The nod of a man calculating what a foundation board member was worth versus what a nurse's employment was worth. Running the numbers. Landing on an answer. He turned to Elena. I'm going to have to place you on immediate administrative leave pending a full review. Please surrender your badge and wait for security to escort you out. The shock hit her somewhere behind the sternum. Not at the words. She had expected the words the moment Park walked through the door and did not check on her first. It was the witnesses. The nurses and doctors and security personnel who had watched Garrett Weston strike a pregnant woman in the face and were now finding the floor very interesting. 2 security guards walked her out. Not roughly, officially, in the particular way of people following an order they are uncomfortable with but not uncomfortable enough to refuse. She handed over her badge. She emptied her locker into a paper bag. She walked the length of the main corridor, past the break room, past the family consultation room, past the room where she had held a dying man's hand at 4 a.m. because his family had not made it in time. The front doors opened. The October air hit her face. It was raining. She stood on the wet sidewalk with a paper bag of her belongings and pulled out her phone. There was already an email from a law firm she had never heard of. Garrett Weston's attorneys were filing suit against her for obstruction of medical care and professional misconduct. The email was time-stamped 11 minutes ago, before she had even handed over her badge. He had called his lawyers before the slap. She read the email twice. Then she started walking toward the parking structure. By the time Elena got to her car, her bank had sent her 3 text alerts. By the time she got home, 22 minutes later, her checking account had been frozen. Her savings account was inaccessible. On her apartment door, a legal notice. Her landlord had apparently received documentation suggesting she had violated a noise clause in her lease. A noise clause in a building she had lived in quietly for 5 years. Garrett Weston's legal team had not just filed a lawsuit. They had filed a war. And Elena Vasquez was standing in the rain outside a locked apartment with a paper bag of belongings and a baby due in 6 weeks. What they did not know, what Garrett Weston had no way of knowing, is that she had a phone in the back of her closet that she had charged once a year for 7 years. And that night she was going to use it for the first time. She sat on the floor of her apartment in the dark for a long time, both hands on her stomach, breathing slowly, letting the reality of the day settle into her body without letting it break anything essential. She had built this life over 7 years. This specific, clean, honest, entirely her own life. She had built it the hard way, the only way she knew how. And in a single afternoon, a man who had never heard the word no had decided it was something he could dismantle as a side effect of being inconvenienced. She sat with that. Then she stood up. She went to the bedroom closet. She moved 3 boxes of winter clothes. Behind them, in the back corner, was a fireproof document case. Inside the case, under her nursing license and her passport and a photograph of her and Kane from 20 years ago at a county fair, was a phone. A simple prepaid phone that she replaced every 18 months, kept charged, and had never used. She had a number memorized. She dialed it. It rang once. "Hey," Kane said. His voice was the same as it always was, unhurried, low, already present. "You already know," she said. It was not a question. "I was in the building." She was quiet for a moment. "Kane." "Yeah." "I need help." Those 3 words had taken her 7 years to say. She felt the weight of them leaving her. "You don't have to say anything else," Kane said. "Go to sleep. Drink some water first. Then sleep. I'll handle it. Don't do anything that—" "Elena." "What?" "Go to sleep." She went to sleep. Garrett Weston found out something was wrong at breakfast. He was at his regular table at a restaurant called the Meridian, corner booth, natural light, the table that had been his every weekday morning for 4 years. He ordered his usual. He opened his phone to check his portfolio. His brokerage app would not load. He tried again. Nothing. He called his financial manager. Voicemail. He called his assistant Patrick. Voicemail. He called his head of legal, a woman named Sandra Fitch who had been his attorney for 9 years and had never once not answered his call. Voicemail. His food arrived. He did not touch it. He opened his email. There were 847 unread messages. He had had 23 when he went to bed. The first one he opened was from the Securities and Exchange Commission. A formal notice of investigation. Filed at 6:14 a.m. The second was from his company's largest institutional investor. Effective immediately, they were liquidating their entire position. The third was from the chairman of the foundation board of Mercy Ridge Medical Center, the same board Garrett had mentioned by name the previous afternoon, informing him that his board membership was being suspended pending a review of recent conduct inconsistent with the foundation's values. His food got cold. He called 3 more people. None of them answered. By noon, his company's stock had fallen 23%. By 2 p.m., his name was trending on social media. The ICU security footage, full resolution, time-stamped, showing the shove and the slap and Elena's hands going to her stomach, had been sent anonymously to 6 journalists at 5 separate outlets simultaneously. All 6 had published within the hour. By 4 p.m., Garrett Weston's publicist had resigned via text message. By 6 p.m., his personal attorney had sent a letter of withdrawal. By 8 p.m., 3 of the 4 restaurants where he had standing tables had quietly informed him that his reservations would no longer be honored. By midnight, his offshore accounts, 2 in the Cayman Islands, 1 in Luxembourg, were empty. Not withdrawn. Empty. As if the money had been a thought someone had changed their mind about. Garrett Weston spent that night trying to hire people to fix it. He had names, the kind of names that do not appear in directories. Men who had made inconvenient situations disappear for people with enough money to make the disappearing worthwhile. He met the first one in a parking garage at 11 p.m. He slid a bag across the hood of a car. He showed the man what had arrived in his mailbox that afternoon. A plain white envelope, unsealed, containing a single card. On the card, printed in clean black ink, was a compass. Pointing north. The man looked at the card for a long time. Then he pushed the bag back across the hood, got in his car, and left without saying a single word. The second man did not sit down. He saw the card and shook his head before Garrett finished his first sentence. The third man, a man with a reputation for taking cases nobody else would touch, looked at the card, looked at Garrett and said quietly, "You put your hands on someone you should never have touched. There is not a person in this city who will take this job. Not for any number." Garrett said, "Why?" The man looked at him with something between pity and professional assessment. "Because the person who sent that card does not negotiate. He just finishes things." Garrett drove to his private airfield at 1:30 a.m. He had a jet. He had a bag of emergency cash he kept in a safe at the airfield. He had a plan, out of the country, somewhere without an extradition treaty, rebuild from offshore. He was walking across the tarmac when the lights hit him. 4 black vehicles materialized from the edges of the airfield like they had been there for hours. Which they had. 8 men stepped out. No weapons visible. No raised voices. They simply flanked him, took his arms with the professional firmness of people who have done this before, placed a black hood over his head, and drove. When they removed the hood, Garrett was in a room he did not recognize. Large, sparse, cold marble floor, almost entirely dark except for a single light at the far end of a long table. Sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and an expression of complete absence of urgency was a man Garrett had seen once before, standing near the exit stairwell of the Mercy Ridge ICU. Hands in his pockets. Watching. Cain Reyes looked at Garrett Weston the way you look at something you have already finished deciding about. Garrett's instincts defaulted immediately to aggression. It was the only instrument he had ever really played. "I have federal contacts," Garrett said. His voice was not entirely steady. "You have no idea what you've started." Cain looked at him for a moment. Then he said, quietly enough that Garrett had to lean forward to hear it, "You thought she was alone." He set his coffee cup down. "You thought nobody was watching. You thought the worst thing that could happen to you was a lawsuit." He looked at Garrett directly. "She has me. She has always had me. You just didn't know to look." A woman stepped out of the shadows with a tablet and a stack of documents. Cain explained the terms without raising his voice or changing his expression. Every financial asset, the company, the properties, the investment portfolio, the patents, The emergency cash that was currently burning in a metal drum in the building's loading area was being transferred immediately into a legal trust. The trust would fund a network of emergency housing and legal aid services for women and children in crisis situations across the state. The transfer was being structured by 3 separate law firms simultaneously. It was irrevocable by design. Additionally, a comprehensive package of Garrett Weston's financial records, 10 years of tax evasion, 2 years of securities fraud, a wire fraud scheme that had cost 14 investors a combined $40 million, had been delivered to the SEC, the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, and the Office of the State Attorney General at 6 a.m. that morning. The delivery had been anonymous. The documentation was complete. Kane slid the documents across the table. "Sign them." Garrett looked at the stack. "You can't do this," he said. "This is extortion. This is—" "You hit a pregnant woman in the face," Kane said on camera, in front of 14 witnesses because she wouldn't let you into a hallway. "Then you froze her bank accounts, filed frivolous litigation, and tried to evict her." He looked at Garrett. "Sign the documents." Garrett Weston, who had not cried publicly since he was 9 years old and had made a private practice of never doing it privately either, wept while he signed. Not from remorse. From the particular experience of watching everything you built leave your hands at once. When he was finished, the hood went back on. They drove for 25 minutes. When they pushed him out, he hit wet pavement and rolled twice before stopping. He tore the hood off and looked up. Mercy Ridge Medical Center emergency entrance. He was in the exact spot where Elena had stood in the rain the previous afternoon with a paper bag of her belongings. He was looking at the same entrance she had looked at, feeling the same rain she had felt. He sat there. 3 minutes later, the first federal vehicle turned into the parking lot. Then another. Then 2 more. The agents stepped out. Garrett Weston did not run. There was nowhere to go, and he understood that now, in a way, he had not understood anything in 47 years of life. And while Garrett Weston was sitting in a federal detention facility trying to explain to a public defender how he had gone from $800 million to nothing in 72 hours, something was happening on the 7th floor of Mercy Ridge Medical Center. Because this is the part of the story that matters most. Not the fall of a powerful man. What mattered most was the room on the 7th floor. And what was in it? The 7th floor of Mercy Ridge was the private patient wing. Quiet in a different way than the ICU, not the urgent quiet of a floor running at capacity, but the particular stillness of a space designed for comfort and recovery. Soft lighting, wide windows, the sound of the city below, muffled and distant. Elena was in room 714. She had been admitted 3 days after the incident when her blood pressure had spiked to a level that her OB had described as non-negotiable. She was being monitored. She was resting. She was, despite everything, okay. The room had flowers on the windowsill that she had not ordered. The nursing staff on this floor treated her with a careful, particular attentiveness that was slightly different from standard care. The kind of attentiveness that comes when a floor has been told, quietly, by new hospital administration, that the patient in 714 is to receive every available resource and every possible courtesy. New hospital administration. 4 months ago, Mercy Ridge Medical Center had been acquired by a holding company called North Point Meridian Group. The acquisition had been quiet, handled through a cascade of shell entities that had made it difficult to trace the ultimate ownership. The board had assumed it was a healthcare investment fund. When the paperwork finalized and the actual ownership structure was revealed, the board discovered that North Point Meridian Group was owned entirely by Marcus Cain Reyes. The revelation had been followed, within 48 hours, by the quiet resignation of Dr. Raymond Park, who had apparently decided that this was an appropriate moment to pursue other opportunities. Dr. Park was currently employed at Mercy Ridge in a different capacity. The janitorial staff had been shorthanded. He was working the 7th floor that morning. Elena heard the squeak of the mop bucket before she saw him. She looked up through the open door of room 714. He was moving slowly down the hallway, eyes down, in the particular posture of a man who has been significantly rearranged by circumstance. He reached the doorway. He looked in. He saw her. He looked away immediately and kept moving. She watched him go. She did not call after him. She looked back at the window. At 4:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, Elena Vasquez's daughter was born. She had her grandmother's forehead and a full head of dark hair, and she announced her arrival to the 7th floor with the particular conviction of someone who has decided that being born is not a thing you do quietly. She was perfect in every specific way. Cain was in the room, standing near the door with his hands folded, looking at his niece with an expression Elena had never seen on his face. Something unguarded, open. The particular look of a man who has spent a decade being the most controlled person in every room he enters and has just encountered something he has no defense against. A newborn. Elena looked at her daughter for a long time. Then she looked at her brother. She needs a name, Elena said. You have one, Cain said. It was not a question. Grace, Elena said. Cain nodded. Grace Vasquez, he said quietly, like he was testing the weight of it. Grace Vasquez, Elena confirmed. He crossed the room and stood at the edge of the bed. He looked at Grace for a long moment. He reached out one hand and let her fingers, impossibly small, impossibly certain, wrap around his index finger. His jaw moved once. Then he looked at Elena. You good? He asked. She laughed. The real kind. Tired and genuine and entirely hers. Yeah, she said. I'm good. He nodded once. The nod of a man setting something down that he has been holding for a long time. He had owned this hospital for 4 months. He had been in the building when Garrett Weston walked through those ICU doors. He had watched the entire thing in real time and walked out a side door because Elena had asked him 14 years ago to never move unless she asked. He had waited 22 hours for her to make that call. 22 hours of watching from a distance while the thing she had built was being dismantled. That is not weakness. That is the most disciplined kind of love there is. The kind that waits. The kind that does not act for itself. The kind that holds completely still until the person it belongs to says the word. Downstairs in the same building where Elena had worked for 7 years, where she had held strangers' hands in their worst moments and asked for nothing in return. The mop bucket squeaked down the hallway. Raymond Park, former chief of medicine, did not look up when he passed room 714 the second time. He kept moving. Across the city in a federal detention facility, Garrett Weston sat in an orange jumpsuit on a metal bench in a processing room. The wealth was gone. The legal team was gone. The board memberships, the restaurant tables, the investors, the people who had laughed with him over expensive wine, all gone. He had spent 47 years building a life in which consequences were things that happened to other people. He had learned in 72 hours what happens when you are wrong about that. Elena pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. The rain outside had stopped. The sun was beginning to come through the window, the early, pale, uncertain sun of a morning that had not fully committed to itself yet. It landed on the flowers on the windowsill. It landed on Grace's dark hair. It landed on Elena's hands. She breathed in the warmth of her daughter, the particular smell of a new person, the specific weight of her. The storm was over. Not because a powerful man had fallen, though he had, completely and permanently. Not because a coward was mopping floors, though he was, but because she was here in this room with her daughter in her arms and her brother at the door, and the world outside had no claim on her anymore. She had fought for an ordinary life her entire adult life. She had not understood until now that the people who love you sometimes fight for it too. Quietly, from a distance, with a patience that looks like absence until the moment it looks like everything. She held her daughter and watched the sun come through the window and thought about 7 years of 12-hour shifts and a dying man's hand she had held at 4 a.m. because his family had not come. She thought about all of it. I built something, she thought, and it held. Garrett Weston walked into a hospital on a Tuesday afternoon and looked at a pregnant nurse and decided she was furniture. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a lot of things. He was wrong about who was watching. He was wrong about what the slap would cost him. He was wrong about the speed and completeness with which a life built entirely on dominance collapses when the dominance is removed. But the most important thing he was wrong about was this. He thought that power was something you accumulated. Money, connections, positions on boards, tables at restaurants. He thought that was what power was. He spent 47 years building a life on that belief. Elena Vasquez had no board positions. She drove a 9-year-old car. She ate lunch at the nurse's station between patients. She made $43 an hour. And when the most powerful person in her professional world tried to erase her, she had already been loved, for 14 years, by the one person you would never want to be wrong about. That is a different kind of power. The quiet kind. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that waits. Here is what I want to leave you with today. The quietest person in the room is almost never the weakest. They are simply the one who has not yet decided to move. Pay attention to who shows up quietly, who stays consistently, who builds without asking for an audience, who loves without making a performance of it, who holds still until you need them and then is simply there. Those are the people worth keeping. And those are the people you should never mistake for someone who can be dismissed. Because they cannot. And the people who find that out the hard way always find it out the same way. All at once. When it is already over. Now before you go, I need to hear from you. What hit you hardest in this story? Was it the slap? Was it the chief of medicine walking past Elena without looking at her once? Was it Kane waiting 22 hours because she had asked him to? Was it the mop bucket in the hallway? Tell us in the comments. Because your answer says something about what you are carrying right now and what kind of loyalty you have experienced or are still waiting for. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you are not here yet, because we have more stories coming that will make you feel every single thing. We will see you in the next one.